Layla Khan, the glamorous Dubai housewife, and Sheikh Kareem, the powerful man she could never resist, were bound together by a secret affair that would end in betrayal, obsession, and death, leaving behind a mystery that still haunts the city's elite. Layla Khan's world was a portrait of wealth and prestige. Her life was the kind that magazines loved to showcase: gleaming marble floors, chandeliers that sparkled like constellations, and closets filled with couture. She had grown accustomed to the privileges that came with being married to Imran, a successful Dubai businessman who built his empire through real estate and trade. From the outside, theirs was a flawless marriage, a partnership that symbolized stability and affluence. Friends envied her, strangers admired her, and even critics couldn't deny she lived in rarefied luxury. Yet behind the high walls of her villa, Layla felt a void she couldn't name. Her days were filled with charity events, coffee mornings, and endless social gatherings with women who shared her world of diamonds and designer handbags. The routine was glamorous but hollow. Imran was often absent, flying across continents to secure deals, leaving Layla surrounded by staff but starved of companionship. Their conversations had grown transactional, their intimacy reduced to appearances at public events. She played her role with perfection, smiling for cameras and standing beside him at lavish banquets. But inside, she longed for something beyond wealth. The quiet moments at night weighed on her the most. The grand bedroom felt cavernous, the silence broken only by the hum of city lights in the distance. Layla often stared out at the Arabian Gulf, wondering if this was all her life would ever be: a beautiful cage. She had everything others could dream of, yet she felt unseen, unheard, and untouched. It was in this emptiness that her hunger for excitement and danger began to grow. Though she didn't know it then, her desire to feel alive again would soon lead her into a path far darker than she could ever imagine. The first time Layla saw Sheikh Kareem, it was at an extravagant charity gala hosted in the heart of Dubai. The ballroom shimmered with golden lights, crystal glasses clinking against the backdrop of soft music, and every guest seemed dressed to outshine the other. Yet, amidst the glittering crowd, Kareem stood apart. His presence was commanding, his confidence effortless, and people seemed to orbit around him as though drawn by invisible gravity. Layla had heard whispers of him before, a man whose wealth and influence extended far beyond business, a figure both admired and feared in equal measure. When their paths finally crossed, it was through a polite introduction arranged by a mutual acquaintance. For Layla, it was supposed to be just another encounter in the endless stream of social obligations. But as Kareem's eyes lingered on hers, something shifted. He was charming in a way that felt different from the polished, predictable compliments she was used to. His attention carried weight, as if he was accustomed to being obeyed, yet he disguised it beneath a veil of charm. The night ended, but the impression remained. Layla found herself replaying the brief exchange in her mind, curious and unsettled by the rush of excitement it had stirred. Over the following weeks, their paths crossed again at art exhibitions, private dinners, and exclusive gatherings. Each time, the conversations grew warmer, the smiles lasted longer, and the space between them seemed to shrink. Layla tried to remind herself of the dangers of being drawn into his orbit. Kareem was not just powerful, he was untouchable. An entanglement with him carried risks far beyond scandal. Yet the attention he gave her awakened something she thought she had buried forever, a longing to feel desired, noticed, and alive. What began as curiosity was slowly becoming a dangerous temptation. The affair began with stolen glances, hushed exchanges, and fleeting moments that carried more weight than entire conversations. Layla told herself it was harmless at first, that the thrill of secrecy was only temporary. But Kareem's world was intoxicating, and soon she was drawn deeper than she ever intended. Their meetings moved from crowded events to discreet encounters hidden away in private suites and secluded villas. What began as whispers in a ballroom became hours spent in the shadows, where she allowed herself to forget the life waiting at home. Each secret meeting left Layla suspended between fear and exhilaration. She knew the consequences of discovery could be devastating. In the circle she moved in, reputation was everything, and scandal could ruin not only her, but her entire family. Yet the more dangerous it felt, the harder it became to walk away. Kareem was unlike anyone she had ever known, commanding yet attentive, indulgent yet unpredictable. His presence filled the void her marriage had left behind, and Layla found herself addicted to the sense of being wanted. She became skilled at deception, masking her absences with careful excuses and fabricated plans. A quick coffee with friends, a sudden interest in charity work, or the convenient excuse of shopping trips, all covered the reality of her double life. But with every lie told, her heart pounded harder, the weight of the secret pressing down on her. It was no longer just an affair. It was a hidden world she couldn't resist entering. Layla knew she was playing with fire, but the allure of forbidden passion kept her tethered to Kareem. What she couldn't see was how quickly the thrill would turn into danger, and how the man who made her feel alive could one day hold her very life in his hands. Imran had always prided himself on being in control. His empire was built on sharp instincts and an ability to sense when something was slipping through his fingers. At first, he dismissed Layla's late returns and distracted demeanor as boredom, the inevitable restlessness that came with wealth and routine. But as the weeks passed, his unease sharpened into suspicion. He noticed how she guarded her phone, how her eyes seemed to drift into distant thoughts, and how excuses began to pile up with unusual frequency. What unsettled him most was the change in her presence. Layla, once careful and attentive, had grown careless in subtle ways. The faint scent of unfamiliar cologne lingered on her clothes, and her smile seemed brighter after nights she claimed were spent with friends. Imran's pride refused to accept the obvious, but denial soon gave way to anger. He needed the truth, and he needed it confirmed. Quietly, he hired a private investigator, someone who understood the delicate nature of uncovering secrets among Dubai's elite. Within days, the reports began to arrive. Grainy photographs of Layla slipping into discreet entrances, records of phone calls at odd hours, and sightings of her in the company of Sheikh Kareem. The evidence was undeniable. His wife, the woman who was supposed to be the jewel of his life, was entangled with one of the most powerful men in the city. Imran's humiliation burned hotter than his heartbreak. In his world, betrayal wasn't just personal. It was a stain on his status, a mark of weakness others would seize upon. He began to imagine not only the collapse of his marriage, but the erosion of his carefully cultivated reputation. What had once been suspicion had now transformed into a simmering rage, one that demanded an outlet. And for Imran, revenge began to feel like the only answer. For Sheikh Kareem, what began as desire quickly twisted into something darker. He was accustomed to getting whatever he wanted: business deals, influence, loyalty, and now Layla was no different. At first, his gestures were grand and alluring. Expensive jewelry, secret trips to hidden resorts, and gifts that few could refuse. Layla basked in the attention, believing she had found the passion her life had been missing. But with each passing week, his behavior grew more intense, more possessive. What seemed like affection soon revealed itself as control. Kareem's calls became constant, his questions intrusive. He wanted to know where she was at all times, who she spoke to, and how she spent every hour of her day. He reminded her that he had the power to make people disappear, that nothing in the city happened without his knowledge. The more she tried to keep her independence, the more he tightened his grip. It became clear that this was no longer just an affair. It was an entrapment. Layla found herself torn between fear and the lingering pull of his charm. Kareem could be ruthless, but moments of tenderness made her doubt her instincts. He promised her a life beyond the constraints of her marriage, whispered of freedom and power if she chose him completely. Yet beneath those promises lay thinly veiled threats. He warned her never to betray him, never to attempt escape, and never to underestimate the reach of his influence. What had once been intoxicating began to feel suffocating. Layla realized she was no longer just a lover. She was a possession. And with every warning, every reminder of his power, she understood that stepping away from Kareem would not be simple. To him, she was not just a woman. She was his conquest, and he had no intention of letting her go. The tension between Imran and Kareem was building silently, though neither man confronted the other openly. Each was aware of the other's involvement with Layla, yet both chose to play a dangerous game in the shadows. Imran, consumed by rage and humiliation, began to plot how to reclaim his dignity. He envisioned exposing his wife's betrayal or even destroying the man who had dared to stain his honor. Kareem, however, saw things differently. To him, Imran was nothing more than an obstacle, a nuisance standing between him and complete control of Layla. Kareem's obsession pushed him toward a final decision. He arranged for Layla to meet him at one of his private villas on the outskirts of the city. It was presented as another secret rendezvous, no different from the countless others they had shared. But this time, Kareem's intentions were not fueled by passion. They were driven by pride, fear of exposure, and a need to prove that no one could challenge his authority. Layla, unaware of the storm gathering around her, prepared herself as if it were just another night in her double life. Imran had his own plan. Through his investigator, he learned of the villa meeting. Rather than confront his wife directly, he decided to use the knowledge to his advantage. He imagined catching them together, forcing a scandal that would tarnish Kareem's reputation as much as it would punish Layla. But what he didn't know was that Kareem was several steps ahead, and his reach extended into every corner of the city. The stage was set for betrayal to collide with vengeance. Layla, caught in the middle, believed she was walking into another moment of stolen passion. Instead, she was being drawn into a deadly trap, crafted by two men who saw her not as a woman, but as a prize neither was willing to lose. The morning after Layla was expected to return, her absence was impossible to ignore. The house staff grew uneasy when her car remained in the driveway, untouched, and her phone went unanswered. Imran, though furious from the night before, maintained a cold silence, claiming she was probably with friends. But as hours passed, whispers began to circulate among those closest to the family. Layla had vanished without a trace, and the air inside the mansion grew heavy with unease. News of her disappearance spread quickly across Dubai's elite circles. Friends speculated she had run away, leaving her gilded life behind for the Sheikh who had consumed her attention. Others whispered darker theories, that Imran had acted in anger, that betrayal within such powerful families never ended quietly. The gossip was fueled by the lack of answers and the silence of those who might have known more than they admitted. Authorities were eventually alerted, but the investigation was complicated by the people involved. Layla was not an ordinary housewife. Her disappearance carried political weight, touching the lives of men whose influence stretched far beyond the city. Every lead seemed to contradict the last. Some witnesses claimed to have seen her leaving in a black car late at night. Others insisted she had been spotted boarding a private yacht. Yet none of these reports held firm, each one fading into rumor. Imran maintained his innocence, presenting himself as a wronged husband desperate for answers. Kareem remained untouched, his name rarely spoken aloud, though many suspected his involvement. For the public, Layla's absence became a mystery that blurred the line between scandal and tragedy. Behind closed doors, however, those who knew the truth understood that her disappearance was not a coincidence. It was the inevitable outcome of a game that had spiraled out of control. Weeks passed before the first real sign of Layla emerged. Fishermen along the Arabian Gulf noticed a suitcase bobbing against the waves, its surface battered by salt water and sun. When pulled to shore, its contents sent shivers through the community. Inside were blood-stained clothing, jewelry recognized from photographs of Layla, and a silk scarf her friends swore she wore to her last gala. Though her body was absent, the discovery shifted the case from speculation to grim reality. Layla was no longer missing. She was presumed dead. The search expanded rapidly, stretching into the deserts and coastlines surrounding the city. Rumors became headlines, and Dubai's polished image was rattled by the scandal of a wealthy housewife turned victim. Weeks later, a chilling discovery was made in a desolate stretch of desert. A shallow grave concealed human remains, partially decomposed under the relentless heat. Forensic testing confirmed what many had feared but hoped wasn't true. The remains belonged to Layla Khan. The revelation shattered the illusions that had once shielded her. The glamorous woman who had symbolized wealth and beauty was now a cautionary tale, reduced to whispers about betrayal, obsession, and violence. Her death drew curiosity and horror in equal measure. Who had killed her and why? Suspicion spread like wildfire. Some pointed to Imran, consumed by jealousy and humiliation. Others accused Kareem, whose pride and influence gave him both motive and means. But as the investigation deepened, clarity never followed. Evidence seemed to vanish as quickly as it was uncovered, and witnesses who spoke one day recanted the next. Layla's body had been found, but the truth behind her death remained buried. What once glittered as a fairy tale life had unraveled into one of Dubai's darkest and most haunting mysteries. The investigation into Layla's death became one of the most tangled cases authorities had ever faced. From the start, it was clear that powerful forces were at play. Files disappeared from evidence rooms, reports were rewritten, and officers assigned to the case suddenly found themselves reassigned to distant posts. It was as though an invisible hand was guiding the investigation away from the truth. Every clue seemed to lead to a dead end. Every lead was swallowed by silence. Suspicion hovered over both Imran and Kareem. Imran had the most personal motive, betrayal and humiliation that could drive any man to rage. Yet when questioned, his alibi appeared carefully crafted, supported by business associates who vouched for his presence at critical times. Kareem, on the other hand, was shielded by his immense influence. Few dared even to mention his name publicly, let alone accuse him of involvement. Those who whispered of his role often did so in hushed voices, aware of the risks of crossing someone so untouchable. The public grew restless as rumors multiplied. Newspapers hinted at a scandal larger than anyone dared to print. Some claimed Imran and Kareem had struck a secret deal, silencing the truth for the sake of their reputations. Others believed Layla had been eliminated because she knew too much, that her affair had exposed vulnerabilities neither man could afford. For Layla's family, the lack of justice was unbearable. They demanded answers, but their pleas were drowned out by the politics of power. In the end, the official report offered only vague conclusions, citing unresolved circumstances and inconclusive evidence. The truth was deliberately blurred, hidden beneath layers of influence and fear. Layla had been silenced, and so had the investigation. In a city built on wealth and power, her death became just another secret that no one dared to fully uncover. The case of Layla Khan eventually faded from the headlines, but it never disappeared from memory. In the polished halls of Dubai's elite, her story became a quiet warning whispered at gatherings and behind closed doors. No one dared to speak openly, yet her name lingered like a shadow, tied forever to betrayal, obsession, and power. Officially, her death was left unresolved, filed away in records as a mystery. But in truth, everyone knew it was not a lack of evidence that kept the case unsolved. It was the influence of men too powerful to be exposed. Some claimed Imran moved on quickly, pouring his energy into business and distancing himself from the scandal. Yet others believed he was broken in ways he never revealed, haunted by guilt or regret no one could confirm. Kareem continued his life untouched, his empire expanding, his reputation shielded by fear and silence. No charges were ever brought against him, though many quietly insisted he had orchestrated everything. Layla's legacy became one of unanswered questions. Was she killed in a fit of jealous rage by her husband, or silenced permanently by the Sheikh who refused to let her go? Did she fall victim to both, caught in a struggle between two men whose pride outweighed her life? These questions were never answered, leaving only speculation. Her story became part of the darker fabric of the city, proof that behind wealth and glittering towers lay secrets that could never be spoken aloud. For those who remembered her, Layla symbolized the danger of desiring too much, of seeking freedom in a world where power dictated survival. She had lived like a queen, adored and envied. Yet in the end, her fate was a reminder that even the most beautiful lives can hide the deadliest truths.